home.
Greetings in the name of Haile Selassie the First and his divine Empress. Empress was Zero Menen Asfaw, also known as Walata Georgis, the daughter of the Dragon Slayer. So first, it's a pleasure to have you all here for the fourth Empress Menen Asfaw Blue Fyah Leadership Itreat. This year I wanted to refocus on the model as a presentation simply because Blue Fyah as a energy, as a word sound that's represented by Sistren is more than just that. It's more than a sound. It's really a call to action based on the Empress's leadership. And her leadership is a model that I think that all of I and I could utilize in order to further the Rastafari nation on behalf of the Rastafari woman. I created this leadership model because I realized after studying leadership at the academy or at university that, leadership in itself has a variety of forms. It is not always that in your face type of leadership that a lot of us kind of we shun because we are oftentimes considered bossy if we move a certain way. Leadership His Majesty, in fact, has so many speeches on the art of leadership that I began to think about, well, His Majesty clearly tells us the different forms of leadership almost as a way of encouraging us to participate in it. This is what leadership isn't. This is what leadership is. This is how a good leader should move. So that began my heavens churning in regards to, well, He's given us His playbook on what leadership is, but what about Empress Menen's leadership? What does that look like? And so in my first book, Roaring Lioness, Rastafari Woman, Journeys of Self-Liberation, I identified the theoretical framework for my book. Okay, what does my research rest on? And one of the theoretical underpinnings for Roaring Lionesses is Clenora Hudson Weems's Africana Womanism. And so when I began to envision a leadership model for Empress Menen and for her work and for Rastafari women in general, I went forward to Hudson Weems's work. I just think you ought to give credit where credit is due, and also knowing that Rastafari women, oftentimes when we consider leadership, we consider it in a way that shies away from terms like feminism, right? We don't want to be termed feminist. We know that feminism is a white woman's construct. We know the purpose of feminism, and we also are savvy enough to know what does fit and what doesn't fit for us. So feminism is definitely not our framework, but there had to be a framework that Rastafari women could fit into, even if it was just for the purpose of fitting into it, but then letting it out on the side so that it fit their particular shape and model, right? And so that particular shape and model that I use as the basis is this work. So I just want us to take a few minutes to look at it. Africana Womanism conceptualizes, right, and prioritizes race, class, and gender. There are 18 characteristics, and I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading them to you because they're here for you to read, okay? So that is the foundation. However, if it was to be remember, this is not a one-size-fits-all model, right? And so in order for it to be tailored, I had to really ideate on Empress Menen and her energy, because contrary to Haile Selassie, our father, right, our job, there wasn't a lot of work that was already written about the Empress out there, except for the speculative work, a lot of it by the European woman who wrote the book on Empress Menen, the biography. All right? So this work is an internal work, it's a spiritual work, it's a very meditative work, and in doing so, in meditating, I came up with 3 pillars of leadership that I could garner from Empress Menen's life. All right? One of them is this leadership I saw her embody in states of emergency. So that's exigency leadership. Okay? A lot of people do that. When you know, things get tough, right? They step into leadership mode. They might kind of stay in the foreground normally, but when things get really hot, they step up to the front. So I saw that exigency leadership that emerges when circumstances are extreme or needs are critical. And then if you look up under the exigency leadership, you'll actually see examples. The war response, she stepped to the forefront. Appeal to women of the world, that famous September 13th speech, stepping to the forefront. Talking to women who had never heard her voice, right? Saying to them, commanding them, and not a very meek type of, I just came out of the shadows and here I am, but a very commanding. She says stuff like, you know, you demand God to do things for you. You know, women use your prayers, and if you only knew based on Proverbs chapter 8 who you are, right, you know that you are able to command the universe, all right? Relinquishing the crown, okay? I mean, for an empress, granted she was born into royalty as a princess and granddaughter of Negus Mikhael, however, pledging to give up her crown for the saving of her nation was one of the most extreme things one could do, right? I'm willing to give it all up if you save my nation, all right? So that's exigency leadership. Then that iretical leadership, which I have it in the middle, and that really, now that I'm looking at it, I'm saying to myself, okay, wow. It's interesting that it's in the middle, because, you know, when you're in the middle of something, you keep something stable, right? But this idea of iretical leadership driven by obedience to a spiritual governance. A lot of people talk about Empress Menen from this spiritual center, but I would argue that they talk about her from a very Christianized, you know, she built churches, you know, she's Waleta Georgis, the daughter of St. George, but I look at it slightly different. Her pilgrimages to spiritual sites, in particular Jerusalem, right? And I know that that's where the research, I think we all need to take a trip to where that monastery was, and I think it's still, remnants of it still exist today, that she built on the banks of Jordan, right? And I think going there, I know, especially when you look at the newspaper clippings of how she was heralded, people will say that the press was saying things like the Queen of Sheba's, you know, daughter has returned, almost looking at her outside of His Majesty. You understand? Looking at her royalty and her regality right outside of His Majesty. Which, if we pay attention to the newspaper clippings that were done, one of the interviews that was done where her daughter, Princess Sahai, says to the journalist who's interviewing her, the journalist asks a question like, well, isn't your father and mother, aren't they related by blood? Are they like cousins? And so Sahai checks her and says, no, that would be Europe. We don't do that. But mother doesn't have to get her legitimacy via marriage. She is as highborn as father, right? So it's almost as if the people in Jerusalem at that time, click the computer, thank you. The people in Jerusalem at that time are aware, you know, of her lineage, and they're definitely connecting her to Makeda, all right? Building and restoring churches, right? That in itself is what we kind of know a lot about her. That's why people consider her to be so, you know, so kind, so charitable. okay? But let's talk about those churches for a moment. When I went to Ethiopia in '09, I remember just noticing how very religious the people were. You know, it was every day seemed like it was a church day. Oh, why are they dressed in white? It's not Sunday. Oh, this is Saint so-and-so's day, right? But Ethiopia has a very, their Christianity is very interesting. So I think that when people like to say, to validate their Christian view of Haile Selassie, well, he's the, head of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. I think we really need to look at what Christianity looks like in Ethiopia, and also the rationale for it in Ethiopia, because it's very Mary-based.
Chat.
Yes, it's very Mary-based. So when we think of Christianity, we think of Jesus. But that's not what's happening in Ethiopia, right? Ethiopians have the book of Saint Mary, where the entire book is about her miracles. Mm-hmm. The entire book is where they're asking her to intercede on their behalf. I will argue that Ethiopians really Hail Mary, that's the real Hail Mary. And if we're going to go into that, then we're also going to have to realize, right, that Hailing Mary, M-A-R-I, is really Hailing Mary, M-E-R-I, which is a Kemetic word for beloved, right? And that Mary was also attached to Mary Isis, right? Which means beloved of Isis. And when it got to Ethiopia, because a lot of things are couched in other things, that they dropped the Isis, but they kept the Mary. So it's not M-A-R-Y, but it is a title, which means beloved, but it is beloved of the African priestess Isis. So yeah, we might want to look at that third one there. And then ascending the throne. That ascending the throne one is deep to me also, because it is a straight line and link to Kushite history and tradition. Because her ascending the throne could never not have happened the way that it did. People argue all the time that His Majesty broke tradition, and sis, you said it accurately first night, that he did not break tradition. He just simply upheld a lost Kushite tradition. So that was iritical, that whole thing. Because if we go forward and we look at her, in which I argue in Blue Fyah, the ascension of the Jayas and Rastafari, from which the model was taken, if we go back and we look at that, we're going to realize that all of this is taking Rastafari to a place where it was never meant to be, because it's based on Christianity, and it's taking us to a place where our African roots and the roots of matriarchy stand firm. Okay, truths and rights leadership, this comes straight out of the Rastafari lexicon, not leadership as a type, but the word sound truths and rights. So leadership aimed at thwarting oppression, discrimination, and racism. So how does she do that? Gender equity and equality, schools for girls, employment opportunities for women and girls, women's associations that she created, and the rejection of child marriages. So these are the three pillars for the leadership model. And if you look up top, just like Clenora Hudson Weems has her 18 characteristics, I designed characteristics that marry each one of the leadership styles. So for example, if a woman were to, because the whole purpose is not so that I could create a model and it could look pretty, even though it does look kind of, I did that with the loops and the arrows. So it's not really about the vanity of it all. It is about the utility of it all, right? And how could it be useful? So these are some things that if a woman were to say, I am utilizing this model, right? These are some things that she, or even a brethren, I don't see why a brethren can't use the model, right? Possesses knowledge of one's sacred self, that will come up under iritical. And identify your leadership style, because like I said, there are a plethora that will come up under iritical. Align with like-minded individuals, truths and rights. Identify women and youth issues, truths and rights. Prepare for sacrifice, because this work, it does require sacrifice. That will be exigency, and you all get the gist of it. So each of the characteristics is directly tied to one of the pillars. And so I wanted to focus on this model because I think that when we go out into our communities and we decide that we want to be leaders, even if we're not necessarily working on behalf of the Rastafari community, that's okay. You're working on behalf of the Pan-African community, that's okay. Your local community, that's okay, right? But if you're functioning from a leadership position, ask yourself, if you are considering yourself a Blue Fyah woman, which one of these you're employing, why, okay? There's a level of adaptability. Nobody leads in all three at the same time, but depending on the circumstance, you need something to draw from. So that was the purpose of creating the model, so that not only as Rastafari women do we go out and we hail Empress, Menen, and I, right? But that we actually walk the walk and talk the talk of our Ivine Giants. And so that's basically what I wanted to cover. I would like to do this as a poster. I envision this, for sale, and was actually being able to explain it, talk about it, utilize it in their communities. So that is the leadership model. I'll take a few questions because we have to be out of here by 5, but if there are any questions, I can answer them. If not, give me some feedback. So either questions or feedback from the participants. Go ahead.
It's a mouthful. I'm so impressed, and I believe you did this online prior.
I showed a bit of it, yes.
Yeah, so this was what captivated me.
Oh.
Yes, so it's not deja vu. It was real. So as you're doing this, I said, but it's the same picture. I didn't want to say somebody stole somebody's work, whatever. But as you speak now, it's all coming back. Yes. Yes. This is profound, and as you said, this is it's coming all from inner, and going forward, as you said, you're going to make this a poster so that other leaders from whatever aspect they're coming from can spread the word and let it move like wildfire, because it's needed. It is so needed, and as you boldly have done, who is not making the connection to see this? Eventually they will, because when something becomes popularized after a while, like, wow, you have a ha-ha moment, so called. So I'm speechless. I don't know what else to say, but I feel really, really inspired and blessed to be here. The little that you know about me, yes, so it's like a full circle for me, and I didn't know this is what needed to be done, and they'll listen here, so it took a long time, and I've done it on different levels, but this is it, and I'm not tooting you on. It's real, yeah, so blessings.
Yes, can you film while I say?
So, I have to stand and give my sister her glory. So give thanks, Recess. It was mighty. I really loved it. All of the applause and all of the accolades. So I've seen it 100 times. I'm part of the Blue Fyah Order of Empress, Menen, and Asfaw. Give thanks, Recess, Jazanai Kush, for bringing this to the world. Give thanks for bringing this to I liberty, that I stand triumphant on, that I's faith is unshakable within. But give thanks for making plain and for making clear the Itreats that have been stirring around in I's Medi for so many years, just trotting through and knowing that I are on the path, I are on the journey, I's faith is unshakable, but so many questions and no answers. So give thanks for this mighty, mighty work. Give thanks for I mother, Empress Menen Asfaw, and for the glory that she has empowered the I to bring forward to I. This is very, very mighty work. It will live on long after I have gone on to other realms. The same way that I go forward to the Bonga Watus and go forward to the Bonga Shefans and to the Mama Aina and this one and that one, and look at those ancients. This work will be the work that the little princesses and the little prince that are coming forward in this Iowa will be able to reflect on and be able to say, yes, Blue Fyah waved the banner high. Give thanks.
Thanks,
Rastafari. Thanks.
I was trying to see how we could,